It all started with a routine stop outside a downtown coffee shop at least. That's what it looked like. A black woman, dressed in a sleek blazer and heels, had just stepped out of her car when a white police officer approached her with suspicion. In his eyes, he didn't ask questions, he didn't explain. He demanded ID with a tone soaked in judgment. Shoppers and bystanders began to watch. Phones came out, and what should have been a calm conversation quickly turned into public humiliation. Officer questioned her car, her clothes, even her purpose for being in the neighborhood. The woman remained calm, quiet, and respectful, though the tension in the air grew heavier by the second. He assumed she didn't belong, he assumed too much. But what he didn't know was that the woman he was trying to shame in front of a crowd was far more than he expected. Her silence wasn't fear. It was power waiting for the right moment, and that moment came when she finally spoke. What she said not only stunned the officer, but also left everyone watching completely speechless. In a matter of seconds, the tables turned, and the officer's face went from smug to stunned. He realized, too late, who he had just disrespected. This wasn't just a stranger, this was someone whose identity would change everything. What followed next was a lesson in dignity, assumption, and consequences. You won't believe how this story ends. But it all began right here. The woman slowly reached into her purse. Not with panic, but with the calm control of someone who'd been in difficult situations before. The officer's hand hovered near his belt, tense, as if expecting trouble. A few people in the crowd began murmuring, uncomfortable with what they were seeing. She pulled out her wallet and handed over a sleek ID card. The officer looked at it, then looked again, his face twitching with confusion. People watching couldn't hear what was written, but they saw his posture shift ever so slightly. The confidence in his stance started to crumble. He glanced at the name on the ID back at her, and then suddenly stood a little straighter. But still, he didn't back down. "You could have said something earlier," he muttered, trying to save face. She didn't respond. She just looked at him with that same calm expression, as if waiting for him to realize the weight of his actions. At this point, someone in the crowd whispered, "Who is she?" Another said, "She must be someone important." Phones were still rolling. Eyes were locked on her dot. The tension didn't ease, if anything. It grew. The officer was clearly unsettled, now unsure of what to do next. The woman hadn't raised her voice once. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything he had said. Who was this woman? Why did her ID shake him so deeply? The truth was about to unravel, and the moment of reckoning hadn't even begun yet. The officer cleared his throat, shifting his weight awkwardly. As the ID trembled slightly in his grip, he hadn't expected this. Not today. Not in front of an audience. The badge number on her ID wasn't just for show, it carried weight, and he knew it. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down, asking pointless questions to try to regain control. "Is this your car?" he asked again, though it was obvious it was. The registration, clearly visible on the dashboard, matched the name on the card he held. Still, he clung to suspicion like a shield. Meanwhile, across the street, a young barista, named Leela, watched through the cafe window. She'd seen the whole thing. It reminded her too much of what happened to her brother last year, pulled over for looking nervous. That memory made her heart pound as she grabbed her phone and hit record. "This isn't right," she whispered to herself, then stepped outside, camera steady in hand. Back near the car, a retired teacher named Mr. Dalton stood among the crowd, arms crossed, shaking his head. "Every time," he muttered. "Always. The same assumptions." He'd lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years and seen this pattern too many times. But this felt different. This woman didn't just hold her ground. She carried something deeper. Authority, history, maybe even power. The officer was beginning to sweat now. His backup hadn't arrived. The silence around him was louder than sirens. And still, the woman hadn't said a word more. The real story was just starting. The woman finally took a slow step forward, her eyes locked on the officer, calm but unflinching. "Are we done here?" she asked, her voice smooth, but sharp enough to slice through the thick tension. The officer didn't answer. He just stared at her ID again, as if hoping it would change. But it didn't. The name printed in bold letters was familiar, too familiar. It belonged to someone with real authority, someone not just known in law enforcement circles, but respected across legal and political spaces. The crowd leaned in. Even the whispers stopped. Leela kept recording, her hands trembling slightly, capturing every detail, the officer's unease, the woman's poise, the growing silence pressing in like a storm. Mr. Dalton stepped closer too, sensing something bigger than just a traffic stop unfolding. "She's somebody," he whispered to a nearby teen. "This is going to mean something." Suddenly, the officer's radio crackled to life. A dispatcher's voice asked for a check-in. He didn't respond. His face had lost its color. He knew he was too deep now, that any move forward would be under the spotlight of every camera, every witness. The moment was spiraling beyond his control. Just then, a black SUV pulled up and parked sharply. A man in a suit stepped out, speaking into his earpiece, eyes scanning the scene. His presence turned heads. He walked straight toward the woman, firm, focused, and clearly there for her. Whatever this woman's identity was, it wasn't just respected, it demanded attention. The truth was seconds away from crashing into the open. The man from the SUV walked directly to the woman, nodded respectfully, and then turned to the officer. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, layered with authority. The officer stammered, unsure how to respond. "Know who she was," he mumbled, still holding the ID like it burned his hand. The man didn't react. Instead, he took the ID, glanced at it, and gave a small shake of his head. "You didn't need to know who she was," he said. "You just needed to treat her like a human being." That line hit harder than anything. The crowd murmured again. Leela caught it on camera, and her live stream began to pick up speed. Flooded with comments like he messed with the wrong one, and asterisk this is justice unfolding in real. Asterisk then came the twist no one expected. The woman reached into her blazer and pulled out a second badge different from the one the officer had seen. This one wasn't just federal. It had a seal most people only ever saw in history books or courtroom documentaries. The crowd gasped. Even the suited man paused for half a second, caught off guard. The woman wasn't just part of the system, she was one of the few who could reform it. Judge, advisor, possibly even higher. Her presence here wasn't an accident. She'd come to observe quietly, without flashing her title, but the officer's actions forced her hand, and now, every eye in the crowd knew, something much bigger was about to happen. The officer's face went pale as the woman held up the second badge. It gleamed in the sunlight, unmistakable in its meaning. She was a federal judge, high-ranking, known for her work on justice reform, and recently appointed to lead a task force on police accountability. The irony hung heavy in the air. He hadn't just stopped a civilian. He had profiled, humiliated, and disrespected one of the country's top legal minds in broad daylight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The suited man stepped forward, now clearly her security detail, and addressed the officer directly. "You are being reported. Everything has been recorded, including your choice to escalate without cause." The officer stammered, tried to explain, but the damage was done. His actions were already streaming online, reaching thousands, maybe millions. The woman turned to the crowd, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "This is what many go through daily. Not all of them have badges. Not all of them have people watching." Her words weren't angry, they were honest, powerful, and echoed with the kind of weight that made people stop and think. Even those who had stood quietly began to applaud, some nodding, others moved to tears. But just as the tension seemed to ease, a soft voice from behind the crowd interrupted. "That's not the first time he's done this." Everyone turned. A young woman stepped forward, holding up her own phone. "I have footage. From last month, same officer, same behavior." The crowd grew still again. What had started as a simple stop had just uncovered a pattern, one that couldn't be ignored anymore. The young woman's voice shook slightly, but her hands didn't. She showed the video on her phone. Another incident, eerily similar. Same officer, same aggressive tone, different victim. The federal judge watched carefully, then looked back at the officer. "This isn't about me," she said quietly. "It's about the people you think no one will believe." The crowd fell, silent, the weight of her words settling deep. Within minutes, an internal affairs unit arrived. Someone had already alerted them, and the evidence was now far more than just one camera. The officer, now visibly shaken, was pulled aside and questioned. No one shouted. No one caused a scene. The moment had already spoken for itself. The judge, now surrounded by people thanking her, walked over to Leela and the young woman who came forward. "You were brave," she told them. "Don't ever stop recording truth." Mr. Dalton nodded in agreement, his eyes soft with relief. "Maybe, now," he said, "change might actually follow." By that evening,